go on ahead and begin. So, this is Parshat Masei. It is the end of the book of Numbers. If you look below, we have the embedded text. You have to scroll down a little bit because it actually starts with Matot, which is the Parsha beforehand, and then this is Masei, chapter 33. And I'm going to actually read out of my book right here. And we're not going to read the entire Torah portion. We're just going to read parts of it, and we're going to discuss it and debate it and see if there's anything in here that we can learn from. So, starting on chapter 33, verse 1, we get into this retelling of the Exodus story, basically. So this is really based on, Exodus 14:8. There's a really great footnote about the telling of this story. And it all leads up to chapter 34, which is going to talk about what the Israelites need to do when they reach Canaan, when they reach the Promised Land, the Holy Land. So I'm not going to retell the entire Exodus story as chapter 33 does, but I think it's important to talk about why the Torah is always repeating itself. Why does it always tell the same stories over and over again? Why are these sort of long prefaces to stories? A lot of that has to do with sort of the literary style that the Torah is written in, and you have to understand as well that there's probably 4 or 5 different literary styles that are working just within the 5 books of Moses. This is also called the documentary hypothesis. This has to do with how the Torah became canonized, who wrote it, what their particular biases and prejudices and cultural background was, etc., etc., and, how that may have influenced how things were written. But the Torah does this a lot. It sets things up. It takes a long time to set things up. And, the reason for it is that it needs to explain why the Hebrews are where they are in this particular situation. What is the context of going into the Promised Land? And, what have they had to deal with up to this point? And now, where are they today? And as I mentioned in last week's Judaism 101 class, one of the great things about the Torah is that it's based on the idea of bringing yourself home. And it's not just a matter of the story of the ancient Israelites and their struggle for the homeland. It's not so much that kind of home, but it's a home that is centering, that is focused. It's coming home to the heart, if you will. And I think that's why, if you look in the Torah, there are so many stories that preface other stories. It's all about sort of bringing it back, bringing us back to an understanding of why are we really here. And the particular attitude that the Torah has is that we were once slaves, and now we have come to a place where we are no longer slaves. You could argue the historical validity of that. Was that true? We really don't know. Archaeologists seem to think no, but nevertheless, there are times in our life on a spiritual level where we are coming from one place, we are going to another, and it's important to understand how we got there. So I'm going to move on to chapter 34 here, and I'm going to start with, let's see. I'm going to go ahead and just start from the beginning of 34. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Instruct the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land of Canaan," so Canaan is what we would call Israel today, "this is the land that shall fall to you as your portion, the land of Canaan and its various boundaries." So then it gets into the idea of each of the tribes having a different boundary, having a different area. So you take this entire chunk of land and it's divided up into sections based on the family tribe. There's one tribe, however, that doesn't get a specific plot of land, and that's the Levites. The Levites are the priestly class. They are the ones who are involved in ritual sacrifice and all of that. What they get instead is basically a little city-state. So they get these little cities within the bigger pieces of land. And they are there to serve as the temple priests and as the sort of scholars and thinkers for that particular tribe that lives in that region. So I think of it as sort of a city and suburb and agriculture kind of space. And a great video to sort of explain that further is if you go on Godcast, and that's spelled G-D-cast.com. They have a really interesting video about it where it talks about the idea of this being sort of city planning to a certain degree. So you have the center of the city, which is the Levite territory. Then you would have a green space surrounding it, which was not used necessarily for farming. It was more of a garden type of idea. And then outside of that, you're going to have the actual farmland, which is the land that the tribe of that region is going to work. Jeremiah makes the point, what is interesting is that later on, Europe, due to pogroms, Jews basically had to live in cities since they weren't permitted to own land. So that's a very interesting point. It's interesting how history kind of flipped itself in that way. So the Levites were sort of treated as this scholarly class, this spiritual class that didn't need to be burdened by having land, that instead they needed to live essentially rent-free in the space that they were provided. That tradition spills over into today. If you look at the way that the Jewish community uses scholarships, we really believe in the idea of education being free and the idea of an elite or a scholarly class being able to survive, and that those of us who work will pay a portion to that because we believe in the importance of academics. In Israel, they take that a step further. There are yeshiva students who are actually funded by the state. There are great Kabbalistic scholars who are funded simply just to sit and study nothing but Torah all the time. So you can see how that concept would translate today. So it goes through and it talks about all of the different tribes and what they got. You then move into chapter 35, and this is where we get more into the idea of, you know, how should the pasture land work and all of that. So we're understanding more of this concept of the rings around the city. So you have the city itself, the sort of free land, and then you have the pasture land, the vineyards. And it would seem like that's an awful lot of gardening, but it's interesting to remember that vineyards, pastures, land like that we would see as just this beautiful green space, that's essentially a factory. That's the industrial area. So it would be more like having, let's say, an urban area like a city today, surrounded by a suburb, surrounded by factories. So it's a buffer, it's a layering, if you will. Jeremiah makes another point about Israel in particular. Israel's a socialist state. Basically, everything the Tea Party and GOP says they are against, Israel found a way to make it work. So, interesting political point. So then we get into this other idea that's really interesting. We're talking about cities, what should be important to a city, what should a city have. And it talks about this idea of murder, of all things. And we get into verse 9 here. The Lord spoke to Moses, "When you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, into Israel, you shall provide yourselves with places to serve as cities of refuge, to which manslayer who has killed a person unintentionally may flee. The city shall serve you as a refuge from the avenger, so that the manslayer may not die unless he has stood trial before the assembly." So, what is happening here, the sense of justice that happened during this time, if you killed someone, the way that it worked was that you didn't have a prison system. You didn't exactly have sort of tribal-based death penalties. You actually would become the property in some cases In other cases, you would become the victim of the family who you had wronged. So, to use an example, let's say I kill someone, and then I am found in front of the Bet Din, in front of the judges, to be guilty. I wouldn't necessarily have a sentence where they would then go out and drag me and stone me. They would actually give me to the victim's family to be stoned. So justice was not in the hands of a court system in the sense of the courts and the police. Instead, you had the idea of ordinary citizens making, for lack of a better word, citizens' arrests. That's why it's said so much in the Torah, do not bear false witness. That you're not a witness in the way that you would be a witness today, in the sense that a judge would call you up and, what did you hear? And the police are there making sure that the criminally accused is in their place. Individuals were basically the police. If you saw someone doing something wrong, you would take them in front of the Bet Din. You would take them in front of the judge. In the same way that if a police officer sees you speeding, they hand you a ticket. So it's a little bit of a different scenario, and I think it's important that people understand that's why the idea of bearing false witness, the idea of lying, is so ingrained into the Torah as being important, to not lie, to not cheat, because you were the police back then. You were the authority. It's said that you have to have at least 2 people witness a crime in order to pronounce a judgment of guilty. And if you go from the perspective that people who witness the crime are not lying, then you have a pretty good system at that point. It isn't until you get into the future where you're going to have a sense of checks and balances and more policing and things like that. So this is a very unique approach to a legal system than what we have today. Nevertheless, because punishment was in the hands of the people who were wronged by the criminal, and in the case of someone who's murdered, even though the murdered person is the one who's wrong, really the ones who continue to suffer are the families having the right to have justice, according to the biblical sense of justice. You would have a problem of people avenging death. You'd have people taking the law into their own hands, which isn't strange because the law is in their hands. So, the Bible commands us to create these cities where people can flee. And this is to protect the criminally accused. It's an opportunity to keep them from being murdered by a vengeful family. And if they are found to be wrong, then so be it. And if they, have been found to have not committed a crime, then they have safe sanctuary. So it's very important to understand what exactly that is. And then we get into this idea of, well, all right, we're talking about murder, we're talking about killing, we're talking about the death penalty, and really, verse 16 through basically chapter 36, a little bit before 36, talks about the difference between murder and killing. And the important distinction being that if you kill someone, you could be doing it for a good reason. The Torah may command it in some cases. The Torah does command the death penalty in a lot of ways, and that's sort of a prickly subject, but it is what the Torah says. And then there's murder. And murder and killing are 2 different things. So what happens here, starting with verse 16, is it starts to expand on this idea. It's sort of a Talmud within the Torah. It's an exegesis. It's an explanation of what exactly this means. So starting at 16, anyone who strikes another with an iron object so that death results is a murder, and the murderer must be put to death. If he struck him with a stone tool that could cause death, and death resulted, he is a murderer. Similarly, if the object with which he struck was a wooden tool that could cause death, and death resulted, he would be a murderer. Okay, so here we have the idea of intention. If you take any kind of tool, and your goal is to commit the crime of murder, then you are a murderer, and it's that simple. So the Torah is taking into account the idea of what you are thinking. This is a unique idea in the legal systems of the day, because we like to joke about eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. That is actually a much harsher sense of justice than what the Bible is suggesting. The Bible is suggesting that we should really be looking at what is a person's intention, what were they attempting to do, what were they hoping to do, and what type of crime is it. If it's a crime in the head, then it's a completely different thing than, say, an accident, something like that. Verse 19, the blood avenger himself shall put the murderer to death. It is he who shall put to death upon encounter. So too, if he pushed him in hate or hurled something at him on purpose and death resulted, or if he struck him with his hand and death resulted, the assailant shall be put to death. He is the murderer. The blood avenger shall put the murderer to death upon encounter. But if he pushed him without malice and a forethought, or hurled any object at him unintentionally or inadvertently, dropped on him any deadly object of stone, and death resulted, though he was not an enemy of him and did not seek his harm, in such cases the assembly shall decide between the slayer and the blood avenger. The assembly shall protect the manslayer from the blood avenger, and the assembly shall restore him to the city of refuge to which he fled, and there he shall remain until the death of the high priest who was anointed with the sacred oil. But if the manslayer ever goes outside the limits of the city of refuge to which he has fled, and the blood avenger comes upon him outside the limits of the city of refuge, and the blood avenger kills the manslayer, there is no blood guilt. Okay, so what does that mean? That's a lot of stuff. What it basically means is that you are given refuge if you had no intention of committing a crime, but you're basically under house arrest. If you try to leave, if you try to lead a normal life, if you try to go outside the boundaries of the city of refuge, then you are culpable for your crime. So what exactly does that mean? Let's put it into some different kind of context. Let's take the example of the number of celebrities who get in trouble for DUIs. And they are given the ankle bracelets. And they are told, you have to stay home. You cannot go outside. You cannot leave the confines of your property. If we see you in a nightclub, if we see you, out for lunch, whatever the case is, then you are not taking your punishment seriously, and therefore, you have to go to jail. It's a very similar idea. The city of refuge isn't necessarily an oasis. It's not a place that you go to, happily, because this is just like normal life. You're basically in a prison at that point. You're restricted there. You have to stay there. You cannot leave that city. So if you are in one tribal land and you are in that city, then that is the city that you have to be in. You can never leave. You can never go anywhere. And you have to wait until the high priest dies. And who knows how long that could be. And that's what an accidental murder punishment would be. You still get to lead some semblance of a normal life, though you're stuck where you are. Now, if you decide to go against that, if you decide that's unfair, if you think, well, yeah, I deserve better than that, I'm going to leave, then you know what? You are no longer on probation at that point, and you deserve to have what comes to you. At least that's what the Torah seems to believe. So that's, basically what that has to say. If we turn to verse 30, if anyone kills a person, the manslayer may be executed only on the evidence of a witness. The testimony of a single witness against a person shall not suffice for a sentence of death. This is very, very important. The Torah is about to offer up what is an acceptable measure of whether or not someone deserves the death penalty. And it's very important to remember that the Torah does not take the death penalty lightly. Critics of the Bible say that it is bloodthirsty, that it recommends the death penalty for all sorts of things. But here there's a safeguard, which says that you have to have a certain number of witnesses. You may not accept a ransom for the life of a murderer who is guilty of a capital crime. He must be put to death. Nor may you accept ransom in lieu of flight to a city of refuge, enabling one to return to live on his land before the death of the priest. You shall not pollute the land in which you live, for blood pollutes the land, and the land can have no expiation for blood that is shed on it except by the blood of him who shed it. You shall not defile the land in which you live, in which I myself abide, for I, the Lord, abide among the Israelite people. So this idea of blood is a very important ritual concept. Blood is used during this time in the animal sacrifice, and God is saying that God does not want innocent blood shed on the land that is holy. And why? Well, because I myself abide, the Lord abide among the Israelite people. So if you shed blood on the land, and it is innocent blood, then you are basically shedding blood on God. This is a really profound idea. The idea that God is uniquely interested in justice, that when we cause suffering to others, when we act in a way that is unjust, God is actually hurt by it. This is a very unique idea, again, in the early cultural legal system during this time. The idea that a God, that a power that is not human would suffer along with people in the same way. Very, very profound, powerful idea. So now we're going to move into 36. Chapter 36 talks about Zelophehad's daughters. So we had discussed that in Parshat Pinchas, but it elaborates on things a little bit further. And I'm going to skip ahead to line 2. They, which is the heads of the clan of the descendants of Manasseh, they said, "The Lord commanded my Lord to assign the land to the Israelites as shares by lot. And my Lord was further commanded by the Lord to assign the shares of our kinsman Zelophehad to his daughters." Okay, so it's now basically retold us the entire story of Parshat Pinchas. "Now, if they marry persons from another Israelite tribe, their share will be cut off from our ancestral portion, and be added to the portion of the tribe into which they marry. Thus our allotted portion will be diminished." So what that means is that Zelophehad's daughters belong to a certain tribe. If they marry outside of that tribe, then their land, Zelophehad's land, which is now his daughters, will become someone else's, because it'll belong to a man from a different tribe, and land passes from man to man. In this case, Zelophehad's daughters are just the intermediary between Zelophehad and whomever would have been his son-in-law, had he still been alive. "And when the Israelites observe the Jubilee, their share shall be added to that of the tribe into which they marry." So we just talked about that. "And their share will be cut off from the ancestral portion of our tribe." So Moses, at the Lord's bidding, instructed the Israelites, saying, "The plea of the Josephite tribe is just. This is what the Lord has commanded concerning the daughters of Zelophehad. They may marry anyone they wish, provided they marry into a clan of their father's tribe. No inheritance of the Israelites may pass over from tribe to another, but the Israelites must remain bound to each other, bound each to the ancestral portion of his tribe. Every daughter among the Israelite tribes who inherits a share must marry someone from a clan of her father's tribe, in order that the Israelite may keep his ancestral share. Thus no inheritance shall pass from one tribe to another, but the Israelite tribes shall remain bound, each to his portion." So again, this takes the idea of Zelophehad, this one situation, and makes it into a much bigger thing. This is the basic premise for how halacha, or Jewish law, works. You have a certain set of laws, and the original law was that land was passed down from father to son, or from a man to his brothers, or some other male figure. Zelophehad's daughters pleaded against that. They said, why should our father's name be blotted out forever when we would be the ones who could take the land? We have worked it anyway. It's our responsibility. So in an earlier Torah portion, the law says, okay, fine, you can do that. You can have the land. It's yours. And then it expands further in this Torah portion and says, well, gee, you know, if they have this land and then they marry someone else, that's going to violate the idea. It's going to violate the spirit of the law, which is that the land should stay within a certain family. So they make another sort of addendum, another added piece to the law. Now, this is strange because the book of Deuteronomy, which is the next book we are going to read, it's the last part of the Bible. There's actually a part in the Bible, in Deuteronomy, where it says, you shall not add or take away from the Torah. You shall not add or take away laws. This is a little strange because here, in this Torah portion, we have the addition of a law. And I don't know what to make of that. I think that's really interesting. I think that conflicts a lot. So I think what we have to understand from reading this Torah portion is that there are times when we need action. So an action could be creating a city of refuge as a way of preventing vigilante justice. And then there are times when we need to look more at the spirit of a law. So the spirit of the law of Zelophehad's daughters, the spirit of inheritance, was that land should stay within a tribe. And since we found a situation where this law didn't work, we have made another change to it. Now, how do we reconcile that with do not add or take away? I think that what that actually means, not adding or taking away from the Torah, has to do with the idea of not adding or taking away things in vain. To actually look at real-life situations, to try to make the Torah applicable to daily life, and not to simply put something in because it's what you want, or to take something out for the same reason. That we're really supposed to look at life on a case-to-case basis, take the Torah, see what the Torah says, see if there's a way that we can work it out, and if we can't, use the law as it exists to make the situation more just. So we don't add another law, we simply understand the law in a new way given a new situation. And some people would say that this is sort of violating the idea of law, that we need rule of law so that we know, what is expected of us, what's demanded of us. And perhaps that's where the balance is. We're not adding new law, we're simply just understanding the law in new ways. I think this is why Judaism has continued to work, because if you look at the practices and the religion that is being taught in the Bible, it's very different than the one that we have now. But it was because we were able to take these laws. We didn't add anything new necessarily. We just understood old laws differently, and we found something that worked a lot better. Perfect example of that is OneShul. So we are commanded to study Torah. Our situation says that, our friend Gabe, who is in Georgia, and our friend Jeremiah, who's in New Mexico, they wouldn't have, a way to participate in Torah with each other, so let's find a tool within the law to make this work. It doesn't say anywhere in the Bible that we can't use electricity, that we can't use a computer, so we take what we have, we combine it together, and we make it work. And I think that that's really a great way to sort of end numbers and to end, what the idea of numbers is, the idea of numbers being about counting, and now we're moving into Deuteronomy, which has to do with words, and that's a really great kind of segue, where numbers, if you think of like an accountant is obsessed with numbers, they need everything to balance, everything has to be orderly and a certain way, and there can't be any changes, there's no variation, 1 always equals 1, and then you look at words. Words can have a lot of different kinds of meanings, they can be understood in different ways, they can be put together in different ways. So what Parshat Masei, the last Torah portion, this portion we just read, does is it connects the dots. It connects us from a numbers world, a world obsessed with law, into Devarim, the idea of words and teachings, and we're putting those two together, and Masei is kind of the glue. It shows these examples with Zelophehad's daughters and all of these other pieces, how we can make that work. So it's an interesting idea, I think. Now, the last thing I want to talk about in this week's Torah portion that I think is really important is to talk about the idea of the land. So we're entering into the land of Israel, into the land of Canaan. And if you go back to chapter 33, verse 50. In the steppes of Moab at the Jordan near Jericho, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, when you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, you shall dispossess all the inhabitants of the land. You shall destroy all of their figured objects. You shall destroy all their molten images, and you shall demolish all their cult places. You shall take possession of the land and settle in it, for I have assigned the land to you to possess. You shall apportion the land among yourselves by lot, clan by clan. With larger groups, increase the share. With smaller groups, reduce the share. If you do not possess the inhabitants of the land, those whom you allow to remain shall be stings in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and they shall harass you in the land in which you live, so that I will do to you what I plan to do to them. So, this is an interesting idea. We are going into the promised land, and there's already people there. And we're being told to do something really terrible to them, to dispossess them, to destroy them, essentially. It's saying, ethnic cleansing. It's saying that we should go in there, we should destroy the land, or destroy the idols, any of their buildings that are related to their religious practices. We need to get rid of those as well. That's an awful lot. That's a really kind of interesting thing. I'd be curious to know what everyone has to say about that, because that's something that we could really struggle with. Yeah, Jeremiah says it's very Zionistic. It's the idea that this is our land, and that we own it, and that's just the way it's going to be. Does anyone else have anything that they'd like to say about that before I kind of expand on that a little bit further? Okay, I guess everyone's quiet today. So, here's my perspective on this. Let's look at it historically. So, archaeologists have suggested that the ancient Hebrews, the ancient ancient Israelites, were actually Canaanites. That they did not come from somewhere else into Canaan, that they were already there when these stories developed. So what does it mean that we should dispossess all the inhabitants of the land, we should destroy all their figured objects? Archaeologists have discovered something very interesting, which is that early Israelites were polytheists. They worshipped the god that we now call Hashem, the name that cannot be pronounced. They also practiced Baal worship, and they were also interested in a goddess named Asherah. And Asherah was basically the wife of the what previously would have been the El god, which we would now call the YHVH god. So they had this kind of dualistic sense of a male god and a female god, a husband and wife sort of team, in that they had children. Very common to the paganistic pantheon. And so the early monarchs wanted to unite the Israelites under monotheism. They wanted to get rid of idol worship, etc., etc. So in this story, we have basically an advertisement for monotheism. The idea that back in our myth history, we were traveling into the Promised Land, and that we had this goal of dispossessing all of the people that were there that were practicing essentially the types of worship that the Israelites were practicing. And I think that what this particular piece serves as a, what's the word I'm looking for? Propaganda, for lack of a better word, or a sales pitch. If you don't like the word propaganda, say a sales pitch. Was that, hey, Israelites, I'm not going to talk about, the fact that you're worshiping female deities and you're doing this graven image stuff. Let me tell you a story. Back in the day when we came into this land, we had a mission that we had to destroy idols. Let's all rally around that. Let's get back to that. Let's be that culture again. So presuming that we were that culture before. And I think that's why you find that in this piece, that the rallying cry of the Promised Land is one that is based on monotheism, and that this was an attempt by the temple priests and by the monarchy to try to stamp out sort of these alternative, non-Hebrew, non-monotheistic practices out of the kingdom and to unite sort of under one thing. Monarchs are often obsessed with uniting kingdoms under one religion. The Church of England, as an example. You have the Queen, who is the head of the church. And that was started because they didn't want to have to be Catholics anymore. So, kind of same idea. One place for one temple and one authority, as Jeremiah says. So I think that that's why we have that in this Torah portion. I think that it's really a rallying cry, not for us to know that back then our spiritual ancestors did these horrible things. Instead, it was written for the time so that you could read this and you could really get psyched up by the idea that that was the right thing to do. A great example of that kind of story, if you look at American history. So we tell stories about how the original Americans came over on the Mayflower and they set up this, this spiritual community in a new America. And you don't talk about some of the tribal warfares that happened, and you don't talk about the ways in which the white colonists in the future would have really displaced and hurt the indigenous people. We have a different story that tells of a certain people. Is it because we need to revere the past? Possibly. But is it really about getting us to go back to a better time and to live as that better time? And I think that that's the case. I think that's why in a lot of, political types of discussions, you have this idea of, back in the old days when it was so much better, we need to get back to an original concept of whatever the case may be. I think that that's where a lot of that comes from. It comes from the idea of telling a story not because that's the way it was, but that's the way that it should be. And if you tell a story about the present that's set in the past, it makes your beliefs more valid. If I was to suggest now that we should go get baseball bats and destroy the local Buddhist monastery, it couldn't just be because I thought that getting rid of Buddha statues was a good idea because we live in the Holy Land and we should be destroying, some sort of idol worship or whatever the case may be. It would work a lot better if I said, back in the day we did this, and now we should do it. It's kind of a different thing. So, that's what I have to talk about with this week's Torah portion. If anyone else has anything else they'd like to add, I have several announcements. I know we ended about 15 minutes early, but that's because I have lots of announcements that I need to make. And so unless anyone has anything else they'd like to add, speak now. Otherwise, I will go on ahead and go for it and tell you all of the other stuff that I have to say, and then we can call it a night. Jeremiah has said, I've said my piece. And Jacob says, it's a quiet sort of evening. Well, I can tell you why it's a quiet sort of evening. and that's part of sort of my announcements that I need to make. So I will go on ahead and go for it then. So if you are a friend of us on Facebook, you're going to notice something interesting. We had 2 Facebook accounts. One was PunkTorah, which was a profile page. The other was PunkTorah, the fan page. We are actually fusing those 2 pages together. So from now on, when you want to find out on Facebook what's going on, all you do is go to facebook.com/PunkTorah. And it's going to have everything that you need right there. And if you are a friend on one page and not a friend on another, doesn't matter. Your information, your account is being moved into this new account, or this new fan page. So it will all be in one place as opposed to being split apart. Now, what does that have to do with tonight? Well, the way that we advertise our events for OneShul is through Facebook. So we were only able to send out about 1/4 of the invites that we normally send out, which would make sense because we have about 4 people here, 5 people here tonight, and normally we would have double that. So that's why it's a quiet sort of evening. So if you try to send us a message on Facebook or something like that, you might run into a little difficulty. It should be that way for the next 2 days, and then hopefully after that it will resolve itself, and we'll be able to move on past that. So, FYI, we're not going anywhere off of Facebook. It just is what it is. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we are looking into new software for OneShul, and trying a lot of different things, experimenting with a lot of things. We are actually in the process of putting out ads for a web developer, someone who knows the software systems, Red 5 and WordPress and other sort of formats, so that we can actually build our own streaming and chat software here on OneShul, as opposed to using Ustream and all of these other sort of third-party pieces. So if you happen to know someone who would like a paying job working for OneShul and doing this sort of development, send them my way. I'm actually going to post here in the chat room the email address. It's patrick@punktorah.org. And you may not know if let's say your friend does websites, and you'll know if they know how to do whatever it is that needs to be done. That's okay. Let them know who we are. Let them know who I am. And even if they don't know how to do it, someone else will. This is the #1 priority for OneShul, is to change this software. We've had a lot of problems with it, and we really need to try to focus on something else. In the meantime, if we can't find someone who can do this, we are talking about going back to paying, I think it's $99 a month to have the ads taken off. We are looking for people who would be interested in sponsoring that. So if you would like to see us be able to get rid of ads, it costs $99 a month, and you can actually give a donation over PayPal to PunkTorah@gmail.com. You can also go on the OneShul website, the PunkTorah website, and there's links there. If you are not a techie type of person and you still want to help out, you can also send a check to PunkTorah. So you send it to PunkTorah, not OneShul, not all the other campaign names. Just send it to PunkTorah, and that's going to be at 440 Yonah Avenue, Athens, Georgia, 30601. So, if you want to donate that way, you can. That's another option as well. So, we're going to be working on that heavily. There's going to be probably a little bit of quiet time around OneShul when that starts getting worked on, because I'm sure that we're going to have software people that are going to need to be on the website, maybe even take it down for a few days. But I will keep you posted on that and let you know what's going on there. The next announcement is we are working on a crowdsourced High Holidays Machzor. So a High Holidays prayer book for OneShul. And we are looking for submissions for that. We're actually looking for someone who would like to head that up and have that be sort of their project. to be a project leader on that. This is a great opportunity for someone who is interested in getting some college credit or some work credit for it. If you're a person who's interested in the nonprofit world or the Jewish communal world, or if you're potentially interested in going to rabbinical school, being involved in this project would really be great. This will be a book that we give away for free, as opposed to books that we sell. So this is going to be a very unique idea. We're looking for people to help contribute written material for that, as well as someone to help lead up that team. So you can send me an email again if you're interested in submitting a writing for it, or if you're interested in getting more information about maybe being a leader on that project. We can certainly use your help with that as well. And last but not least, the God Project. We have tons of traveling coming up. So this weekend we're going to be in Minneapolis. We're going to be with a Reform synagogue called Shir Tikva. They're having an event in a park that we're going to be taping, so we'll be there for that. And then the middle of next month, we will be in Los Angeles. We're going to be there from the 10th through the 14th. We're going to be doing lots of stuff there, so if you live in LA, meet up with us there. We're going to be in Portland, Oregon on August 18th, and actually I had fun today because I went on Google Maps and I saw where we were going to be staying in Portland. I'm very excited about the neighborhood that we're going to be in. On a personal note, I almost went to Portland State University. I love that school and I love that city. I wish I could be there for more than 24 hours, but that'll be fun. So come hang out with us in Portland. We have other dates that we're working on. We're working on New York again. We're working on, Baltimore. Washington, D.C. is coming up. And then the biggest thing that we're trying to accomplish is to go to Denver. The General Assembly, which is, there's a nonprofit called Federation, and they're sort of the big Jewish nonprofit. They have an annual meeting, and this year it's going to be in Denver. Last year it was in New Orleans. And so we are hoping to go to that, and also while we are there, to interview Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shlomi, who is the founder of Jewish Renewal, and to cause some general mayhem at the Federation. So if you live in the Denver area, Boulder area, you know someone out there, let them know that we're hoping to come out. In order to be able to afford it, we are hoping that someone will be able to help us with a place to stay when we are in Denver. It's the only city where we don't know someone that we would otherwise be staying with. We always crash at people's houses, or sometimes synagogues help us with a place to stay. Denver is the only place where we don't already have some connections. So if you know someone in the Denver-Boulder area that would be willing to give us a place to stay for about 2 or 3 days, we would greatly appreciate that as well. That's going to be in November, so that's still got a long ways away. I think that that's everything that I had to talk about. Of course, as I mentioned before, we are an independent community. We exist because of small donations. We are not part of a larger organization. We're not affiliated with any particular Jewish movement. We're just individual Jewish people that like doing Jewish stuff. So if you support that, if you've enjoyed this class tonight, I hope that you will send a donation either to PunkTorah@gmail.com or a check to the address that I gave. If you can't donate money, time is the most valuable thing in the world. So I'll give 2 quick examples. We have our friend Gabe, who is in the room with us. Gabe actually donated the table that is behind us here. I don't know if you can see it because it's black, but that's the table right back there. So Gabe donated that. You know, that's a great donation. That's a great thing to help us with. Jeremiah is another great example. And Jacob, there you go, and Jacob as in Jake. I didn't realize that was that Jacob. They donated that table. Jeremiah donated his time. He donates the podcast. So we have a podcast that comes out every month, and Jeremiah does that. So that's another example of how you can help, you can participate. We're always looking for people to help write for PunkTorah, to help write for OneShul, to teach classes, to lead prayer services. So always appreciate your help there. Send me an email. Let me know what interests you. Let me know what your hobbies are. You'd be surprised how you can help. There's always a way to help. And there's always a way to take whatever you're passionate about and have it help the community. So an example is my wife. My wife runs the New Kosher website. She's a foodie, you know, that's what she's into. She likes to cook and stuff like that, so she runs that website. You know, that's a great way of taking something that you like, something that you're passionate about, finding a way to connect God to it, and then to connect other people to it. And that's really what we're here to do. Oh, I did have one more announcement that I wanted to make. This is actually two small, one small one and one big one. So the small one is tomorrow is our last Judaism 101 class. It's going to be on Israel. It's going to be about what does Israel mean. It's not about the politics of Israel. So if you're expecting to, go into this class and learn all about Palestinian and Israeli issues, that's not quite what the class is about. It's more about the history of the Jewish concept of Israel, the concept of community, and all of that. So it's a little bit different than sort of a political type of thing. But that is tomorrow, 7 p.m., right here at OneShul. The second announcement, and this is a really big announcement. We're working on a digital project called the Video Siddur. And what it'll be is a DVD. So you think of, any kind of DVD, and just one of these little deals, and you put it in your DVD player, and it has the 3 daily prayers in video, music, written, and audio form, all available. And you can actually select how you want the text to present itself. Do you want it presented as writing? Do you want music? Do you want something just spoken? So you have this whole thing where you can daven by watching TV. It's also going to be available for free on YouTube. So you can watch it for free on YouTube, or if you want to buy a copy to, put on your computer, to, watch on a DVD player, something like that, you can buy that as well. But we're working on that right now. We're looking for community members who want to assist in that. There's lots of things that we need. We need royalty-free images, which are actually very hard to get. We also need music for it, and that, again, is royalty-free music. We will need to do a fundraiser to print the DVDs. Right now, we're looking at a cost of about $1,000 to do that. And then we just need volunteers to take the time to help us make the videos. We have someone here who's been helping us with some other videos. Our intern, Ashton, has been helping us with a video series, but this is a particular video series that we need a lot of help with. So I would appreciate your volunteering, and I won't kick a dead horse. You know how to get in touch with me. So, anyway, once again, thank you very much for coming to OneShul, the only synagogue as unique as you are. Tune in tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Judaism 101, and then again on Sunday at 7:30 for Rosh Chodesh with Ketzira. And I hope you have a wonderful evening, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thank you.